When the train pulls away from the first station, the city is only beginning to rub the night from its eyes. Inside the carriages, everyday life is already thickening into that familiar half-darkness of routine. People stand shoulder to shoulder. They stare at phone screens. Or they stare into their own thoughts. They are silent. They are focused. Because in Addis Ababa, you do not board a tram for comfort. You board it out of necessity, out of the need to stay afloat, out of hope for work, for education, for that small, often barely noticeable step upward in the hierarchy of life. Along the tracks, scenes slide by that look like two realities spliced together with editing tape. Modern office towers rise with ads for banks, mobile operators and fintechs promising an African future. Right beside them sit tin roofs, markets, improvised workshops, houses built faster than anyone managed to legalize them. It becomes an urban patchwork. Chinese infrastructure tries to impose order. The city resists. It has lived for decades by its own rhythm of chaos. This tram does not move through a vacuum. It cuts through social layers. It cuts through ambition. In a single carriage, you can find officials heading to the offices of the African Union. You can find young students dreaming of jobs in technology firms. You can find vendors returning from night shifts. You can find women carrying goods to local markets. They all share the same vehicle, yet each of them sees it differently. For some, it is a symbol of civilizational advancement. For others, it is another foreign machine. A machine that changes the rules of the game faster than society can adapt. The traffic control system works like an invisible conductor. It synchronizes lights. It synchronizes switches. It synchronizes timetables. From a distance, it creates an illusion of perfect coordination. But Ethiopian reality interrupts that illusion. Power outages arrive without warning. Networks overload. Technical backup is missing. And modernity collides brutally with local infrastructure inherited from decades of underinvestment. When the tram suddenly stops in the middle of the route, passengers do not shout. They do not protest. They do not file complaints. They simply sigh. They step out. They continue on foot. They have learned a lesson. Technology in Africa operates according to its own rules. Even the most advanced technology. Those rules resemble negotiations with reality, not hard algorithms. A few kilometers away, beyond the sight of ordinary residents, there are operational centers. Chinese technicians work there. Engineers work there. Managers work there. They analyze data. They monitor passenger flows. They plan further modifications of the system. They treat Addis like a gigantic urban laboratory, a place where solutions can be tested, a place where they can be refined, before they are transferred to more expensive and more prestigious projects in the Middle East. It is here that knowledge is produced, knowledge that will later be used in Dubai, in Riyadh, in Doha, in the new cities of the future, places where transport infrastructure will no longer be merely a way of moving people. It will become part of an architecture of control, part of the management of social flows, part of the optimization of entire metropolises. In Addis Ababa, no one officially speaks about control, but cameras are everywhere. Ticketing systems register behavior. Data analysis predicts human flows with precision, a precision that only a decade ago belonged to the world's richest cities. And so a digital shadow appears. A digital shadow of every passenger who steps into the carriage. And it is precisely here that the tram stops being just a mode of transport. It becomes a fragment of a larger puzzle. Infrastructure becomes the foundation of a new geopolitical order. Concrete replaces tanks. Steel replaces artillery. Fiber optics replace convoys. And infrastructure investments begin to push aside classical diplomacy. When the tram begins to run regularly through the central districts of Addis Ababa, it changes more than the city's transport map. It changes the structure of daily life, because wherever fast, cheap mass mobility appears, the city rearranges itself. Labor markets shift, property prices move, local businesses relocate, Informal earning networks transform. Networks that kept millions alive for decades. For students and young workers, the tram means a shorter path to the center. It means access to universities. It means access to offices. It means access to companies that were previously out of reach. But for minibus drivers, porters, small transport operators, and street taxi drivers, the tram means something else. It is the beginning of the end. It is the end of an old model of earning money, a model without timetables, without apps, without central regulations, a model built on flexibility, on improvisation, on quick cash. Around the new tram lines, informal stops begin to disappear. Improvised terminals disappear. Tea and food stalls disappear. Stalls that served drivers and passengers of the old buses. In their place, new retail points appear, chain stores, ATMs, advertisements for financial operators, mobile payment apps. The city is pulled into the digital economy, and those who cannot keep pace are pushed to the margins. Many drivers who transported people for years suddenly find themselves without customers, without savings, without a plan B. They cannot locate themselves in a world where transport begins to be controlled by state systems, by infrastructure contracts, by traffic management algorithms, not by street entrepreneurship, not by local arrangements. For them, the tram is not a symbol of modernity. It is a cold, metal competitor. It does not negotiate prices. It does not stop on request. It does not provide work for entire families. It does not function within local social networks. It follows the logic of a global infrastructure project. At the same time, apartment prices near the tram lines begin to rise faster than elsewhere. Access to fast mobility becomes a new urban currency. Developers arrive, investors arrive, the middle class arrives, and the poorest residents are pushed outward, toward the outskirts, toward places where infrastructure still cannot keep up with demographic explosion. In this way, the tram, designed as a tool of equality, begins to draw new lines of social division. It draws new borders, borders between those connected to modernity and those pushed into peripheral zones, zones where transport still relies on old, informal systems. In markets and workshops, you increasingly hear the same thought. The city no longer belongs to ordinary people. Addis is becoming a project for investors, for diplomats, for corporations, not for residents who built it over generations, residents who sold goods on the streets, who repaired cars, who cooked food, who maintained the informal economy that served as the backbone of urban life. At the same time, younger generations see the tram differently. They see a passport to a world they once knew only from the internet, from films, from social media, a world where the city moves faster, where it works more efficiently, where it feels more predictable, a world where you do not negotiate every ride, where an app replaces cash, where infrastructure offers the feeling of belonging to global civilization. Within this tension, Addis Ababa begins to crack into two speeds of development. One speed is plugged into Chinese infrastructure. It is plugged into global technological networks. The other speed remains tied to local markets, to traditional occupations, to the informal economy. That older world does not vanish overnight, but it slowly loses ground. And here a question appears, a question no one officially wants to ask, because it disrupts the narrative of progress. It disrupts the narrative of modernization. Does infrastructure development truly lift everyone? Or does it simply shift wealth and opportunity toward those already closer to power, closer to capital, closer to technology? Because when the tram accelerates the city, not everyone can keep up. Not everyone has a ticket to this future. Not everyone boards the same carriage. When passengers step into the tram, most of them think about work, about exhaustion, about whether they will make it to a meeting, about whether they can sell more goods at the market today. They do not think about data. Yet, in the moment they tap a card, scan a ticket, or pass through gates, they activate an invisible digital infrastructure. That infrastructure begins recording movement, recording time, recording routes, recording behavior. It builds a digital trace of the city's everyday life. Cameras placed on platforms watch, cameras inside carriages watch, cameras at intersections watch, cameras near switches watch. Officially, they serve safety. In practice, they create an observational layer, a layer that makes it possible to manage human movement at metropolitan scale. It analyzes crowd density. It predicts congestion. It detects anomalies. It responds faster than ever before. Public transport becomes the backbone of the digital city. For city authorities and infrastructure operators, this is a massive advantage. It optimizes timetables. It helps plan new lines. It shifts resources. It supports crisis response. But for ordinary residents, it means something else. It means a slow shift of the privacy boundary. A shift so gradual it is almost invisible. Everyday movement stops being anonymous. It begins to resemble an activity log inside an app. In Addis Ababa, no one officially talks about mass surveillance. Yet the technological architecture of the Tram is compatible with the solutions used in Chinese smart cities. Facial recognition systems exist. Behavioral analysis exists. The integration of transport data with other state databases exists. In those systems, it is the norm, not the exception. That means infrastructure used today to steer tram traffic can tomorrow be connected to broader city monitoring. It can connect to citizen registries. It can connect to street cameras. It can connect to analytical platforms. One coherent network emerges, a network of control over public space. The city begins to function like a vast organism managed by algorithms. In practice, this gives the state new abilities. It can map social behavior in real time. It can detect protests. It can monitor gatherings. It can anticipate tensions. It can react before events spin out of control. In politically unstable regions, this becomes a tool as powerful as the army or the police. The tram becomes more than transport. It becomes a social sensor. It collects data on the city's pulse. It measures where people gather. It measures when they return home. It measures which districts grow. It measures which empty out. It produces a digital map of everyday life. For China, this is invaluable. Every such city becomes a testing ground, a proving ground for smart city technologies. Technologies later exported to the Gulf, exported to Southeast Asia, exported to further African states. A global market grows, a market for digital infrastructure tied to Chinese technological standards. For Middle Eastern states, Addis Ababa becomes a reference point. It shows how cheaply and at scale traffic management and urban surveillance systems can be deployed. Later, those systems will be wrapped in luxury. They will be wrapped in marketing. They will be wrapped in futuristic visuals. In Dubai, in Riyadh, in Neom. But their core will remain the same core as in the Ethiopian tram. The problem is simple. Residents of Addis Ababa never signed a social contract for constant digital oversight. The project was sold as transport, not as a data collection system. The boundary between security and control shifted. It shifted without public debate, without transparency, without any real possibility of refusal. As a result, a new model of city emerges. Movement becomes technically easier than ever, yet it becomes more recorded, more monitored, more analyzed. A paradox forms. The faster the transport, the slower the privacy. In the evening, the tram passes through illuminated districts. Cameras blink with red diodes. They remind passengers of something they prefer not to think about. They are being watched, even when no one physically looks at them. And it becomes clear that Addis Ababa is entering the era of the digital city. It becomes clear that concrete and fiber optics are becoming instruments of a new kind of power. A few kilometers from the tracks used daily by hundreds of thousands of residents, there is a space most passengers never visit. Tram lines do not lead there. There are no tourist attractions there. There are no local markets there. Yet this is where the technical heart of the entire project beats. Inside closed compounds inhabited by Chinese engineers, by technicians, by site supervisors, by managers of infrastructure contracts. These compounds look like a fragment of another world pasted into African space. They have their own security, their own canteens, their own shops, their own delivery logistics, their own daily rhythm. That rhythm is dominated by Mandarin, by Chinese mobile apps, by internal communication systems. A community runs parallel to the local city, but it is not part of it. For many Chinese workers, Ethiopia is not a place to live. It is a contract. It is a project. It is a task to be completed. After that, they return home. They leave infrastructure behind. But they do not necessarily leave behind relationships, or cultural ties, or long-term integration, because the system is not built for that. This produces a model of foreign presence different from classic Western colonialism. It does not rely on territorial administration. It does not rely on civilizing missions. It does not rely on permanent settlement. It relies on rotating technical cadres, on time-limited contracts, on closed infrastructure enclaves that function like mobile operational bases of state-driven global capitalism. For local residents, these compounds symbolize foreign presence, a presence that brings jobs, investment, technology, but also a presence that creates a barrier, a cultural barrier, a social barrier, an economic barrier. The most important technical and financial decisions are made outside Ethiopia. Key competencies remain in external hands. In many cases, local workers are hired mainly for lower technical roles, or auxiliary roles. Strategic positions remain filled by Chinese staff. The sense of technological dependence grows. A familiar structure hardens. Africa provides space and labor. Know-how remains the property of foreign firms. This model begins to resemble a network of infrastructure nodes scattered across the continent. Ports and railways in Kenya, mines in Zambia, energy projects in Ethiopia. Together they form an invisible map of influence, a map based not on borders, but on the flows of capital, of technology, of data. And the same model is increasingly copied by Middle Eastern states. They use Chinese contractors more often. They use them for mega infrastructure projects. From Dubai to Riyadh, a triangle of cooperation forms. China supplies technology and personnel. The Gulf supplies capital. Africa supplies the testing ground. The solutions are deployed later in wealthier regions. A new global system of infrastructure production emerges. Cities of the future are no longer designed locally. They are assembled modularly, like technological kits that can be deployed anywhere, as long as political and financial conditions are met. For residents of Addis Ababa, this means living next to foreign infrastructure that formally belongs to the city. Yet mentally and technologically, it remains rooted in external decision centers. Questions follow. Questions about technological sovereignty, about control over data, about the real influence of local authorities over systems that have become the backbone of metropolitan life. In the evenings, when the lights in Chinese compounds go out according to shift schedules, trams can still be seen moving through crowded districts in the distance. The contrast becomes sharper. On one side, there is a closed, ordered, technocratic space. On the other, there is the vivid, chaotic human reality of Addis Ababa. And in the crack between these two worlds, a new kind of dependency is born. A dependency that needs no flags. It needs no administration. Its instrument is not political rule. Its instrument is control over technology, over financing, over operational knowledge. Addis Ababa was not chosen by accident. It is not just another African metropolis. It is the political center of the continent. It is the seat of the African Union. It is a place where diplomatic interests intersect with financial interests, where infrastructure interests intersect with strategy. It becomes an ideal environment for testing solutions. Solutions later exported to the Gulf in far more expensive forms, in far more spectacular forms, in far more media-friendly forms. What is implemented in Addis Ababa cheaply and quickly appears in Dubai, Riyadh, or Doha as a luxury product of the future. It is wrapped in marketing, wrapped in futuristic architecture, wrapped in the narrative of innovation. Yet the technical core remains the same. It is built on Chinese systems of traffic management, on urban surveillance, on the digital infrastructure of metropolitan control. In this sense, the Addis Ababa tram becomes a prototype of mass transport for the future megacities of the Middle East. In those cities, mobility will not be merely about moving from one place to another. It will become part of the architecture of spatial control, part of population management, part of the optimization of human flows in cities of tens of millions. Gulf states have capital, but they lack enough homegrown technological specialists. So they rely increasingly on Chinese contractors. And they treat Africa as a test area, a place where systems can be observed under heavy load, under unstable energy infrastructure, under rapid urbanization, before those systems are deployed in Neom, in Chidia, in new districts of Dubai. A new architecture of three-way cooperation forms. China provides technology and know-how. The Gulf provides financing and global marketing. Africa provides space and scale, and it provides real-world testing conditions. It becomes a proving ground for the urban experiments of the 21st century. This means that the experience of Addis Ababa shapes the design of future Middle Eastern cities, mobility solutions, ticketing systems, monitoring, traffic management, the integration of urban data. They are built on African data, not on laboratory simulations. It also means that residents of Addis participate in a global urban experiment, often without realizing it. Their daily commutes become input data for cities that will rise thousands of kilometers away, in different social realities, in different economic realities. For the Gulf, this arrangement is ideal. It minimizes technological risk. It tests solutions under harsher conditions. It deploys them later in richer environments, in more stable environments, in more politically controlled environments, in places where the cost of mistakes would be far higher. At the same time, it creates a new kind of infrastructure dependency. Africa does not merely import technology. It becomes an R&D base, a base for projects implemented later in the Middle East, from public transport to AI-driven city management systems. And so the Addis Ababa tram stops being a local transport project. It becomes part of a larger puzzle. Transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, digital infrastructure, all become tools of geopolitical future-making. The global center of gravity shifts. It shifts from Europe and North America toward the China-Middle East-Africa axis. So when politicians in Riyadh speak about cities of the future, and investors in Dubai present visuals of autonomous transport, few mention where early versions were tested. They were tested on the streets of Addis Ababa, in conditions far removed from luxury visions. And yet it is precisely here, in a crowded, dynamic, often chaotic city of East Africa, that a working version of the future world is being built. A version that will only later be presented as a finished product. If today, the Addis Ababa tram seems like nothing more than a local transport project, it is only because the world still does not fully grasp the scale of the transformation now unfolding across Africa. Hundreds of new cities will rise, dozens of mega-metropolises will expand, an infrastructure network will emerge. It will reshape the global economic order faster than Europe's industrial revolution. By 2040, Africa will become home to hundreds of millions of new urban residents. People will move from rural areas into agglomerations. They will seek work. They will seek education. They will seek stability. They will generate unprecedented demand. Demand for public transport, for energy, for water, for digital networks, for housing. Infrastructure becomes the most valuable strategic resource of the 21st century. In that context, the Addis Ababa tram is only the first signal. The wave of urbanization is coming. It already attracts the world's greatest powers. Because whoever builds Africa's infrastructure will not only earn billions, they will gain political influence, they will gain access to data, they will gain elite loyalty, they will gain control over the logistics of future markets. China entered this game earlier than the West. It offered fast financing. It offered ready technologies. It offered a delivery model based on state infrastructure capitalism, a model that does not require lengthy parliamentary debates. It does not require years of public consultations. It does not require complex environmental procedures. It builds faster. It builds cheaper. It builds at scale. The Middle East enters the puzzle with enormous energy capital. It becomes a financial catalyst of Africa's urbanization. It invests in ports, in railways, in public transport, in housing. It treats the continent as a future market, as a production base, as a strategic buffer for the era of the energy transition. The West increasingly loses the infrastructure race. It relied for decades on grants, on political conditionality, on slow procedures. That model cannot match Africa's tempo. Space opens for alternative centers of influence. In practice, this means that Africa's future megacities will be designed according to standards not born in Brussels, Washington, or Paris. They will be designed according to standards born in Beijing, in Dubai, in Riyadh. Global transport systems will shift, energy systems will shift, digital systems will shift, for generations. For Africans, this brings both opportunity and risk, a chance for a civilizational leap, and the risk of a new dependency. A dependency in which access to modern infrastructure is tied to foreign financing, foreign technology, and foreign management models. Local autonomy shrinks. Africa's cities in 2040 will be larger than ever, faster than ever, more digital than ever, but also more monitored, more dependent on algorithms, more vulnerable to external influence from those who provided the capital and the technology to build them. This means that the struggle for Africa will not be fought on battlefields. It will be fought on construction sites, in data centers, at development bank negotiating tables, in server rooms managing urban movement. Infrastructure decisions will matter more than political declarations. In this new world, the tram stops being a vehicle. It becomes a symbol of an era in which steel, concrete, and fiber optics replace artillery, and cities become the main arena of geopolitical competition. Africa is no longer a peripheral zone of the global system. Africa becomes its center of growth and its future battlefield, the battlefield of 21st century infrastructure wars. And Addis Ababa? When dusk falls over Addis Ababa and the city begins to slow its daily rhythm, the tram still runs. It cuts through districts that, in the light of the setting sun, look like a map of the future and the past laid on top of each other. On one side of the tracks you see towers, bank ads, the glow of new offices. On the other, you see darker streets, improvised homes, places where modernization has not yet arrived. Inside the carriages sit people who do not think about geopolitics. They do not think about China. They do not think about the Middle East. They do not think about the new Silk Road. Their world is built from commutes, from bills, from work, from exhaustion, from the hope that tomorrow will be even slightly easier than today. And yet each of these passengers is part of something larger, even unknowingly. The project stretches from Beijing through the Gulf to African metropolises. It creates a new world map. On that map, the most important points are no longer borders. They are rail lines. They are ports. They are data centers. They are transport systems. This tram does not know where the world is going. It simply moves. But its tracks define the direction of the era. Because in the 21st century, the winner is not the one with the biggest army. The winner is the one who builds the fastest, the one who finances the cheapest, the one who controls the infrastructure that binds economies, cities, and societies into a single system of dependency. Addis Ababa is not the end of this story. Addis is the beginning.